Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country is a movie about the wall coming down in outer space. Another stroke of genius from the dream team of Leonard Nimoy and Nick Meyer, who returns this time after the disaster of Star Trek V to end the series on a good note, the note of a masterpiece. This idea for the film came about due largely to the current events of the time, but like all great Star Trek stories, it is universally relevant. Prejudice, mistrust, and nationalism are all just as human a condition as love, friendship, and sacrifice, and this movie has the flat-out balls to portray that darker side of the human condition. Nick named this one The Undiscovered Country, which was supposed to be the title for Star Trek II, but I feel it fits better here, because what this movie is ultimately about is fear of the future and what that change might bring. This time the Klingons are essentially the victims and the Federation essentially the antagonists, at least a small faction of them. The Klingon moon Praxis has exploded a la Chernobyl, and the Federation decides to pull their forces out of the neutral zone and let them rebuild. Now, there are a lot of people sitting at this table who think this is a terrifying idea. They want to use this opportunity to bring the Klingons to their knees. That position is overruled, however, as Kirk is ordered to escort the Klingon Chancellor to the peace negotiations, a decision that Kirk laments. Because in a bold move, this film puts Kirk on the side opposed to peace. He not only doesn't trust the Klingons, but he has a personal reason for his mistrust: the death of his son at the hands of the Klingons.
They're animals, Jim.
There is an historic opportunity here.
Don't believe them. Don't trust them.
They are dying.
Let them die.
The Chancellor Gorkon is a stand-in for Gorbachev, a historical figure who wants peace and reform, but is surrounded by opposition to that change on both sides. The Chancellor sees the peace conference as an opportunity to usher in change, but he finds resistance to that change in something as simple as sitting down to dinner. He beams aboard along with General Chang, played brilliantly by Christopher Plummer, and even in this friendly setting, hostility cannot be kept in check.
The Federation is no more than a Homo sapiens-only club.
Present company accepted, of course.
In any case, we know where this is leading. The annihilation of our culture.
That's not true.
No.
No.
To be or not
To be.
That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk. We need breathing room.
Earth, Hitler, 1938.
I beg your pardon?
Now, prejudice is a human quality that in Gene's Star Trek universe had been removed from our society. Thus, he was furious to see Starfleet officers participating in it. Gene tried to prevent this film from ever being released for just that reason. That and the portrayal of Starfleet as more militaristic than he liked. But sadly, Gene passed away before he could take any real action against the film. Personally, I can understand how he felt to a point, but I don't see how this was much different from the way certain people's attitudes were depicted in the original series. Like a lot of Gene's reactions to almost all of the Star Trek films, it makes me wonder if he had ever even watched his own show. Look at the episode Errand of Mercy, just to give one example. The Federation and the Klingons couldn't wait to get their hands around each other's necks. And even though the Federation society as a whole may have moved beyond prejudice and mistrust, it may be the case that some individuals still need to learn this lesson. After all, only a small handful of dissidents were involved in this conspiracy. And what a conspiracy it is. Moments after the Klingons return to their ship, they are apparently fired upon by the Enterprise, they are boarded, and the Chancellor is assassinated. The interesting thing is that while this assassination isn't what Kirk wanted, the outcome is exactly what he wanted. He does not want peace. He is so consumed with bitterness and resentment towards the Klingons that any talk of peace is dismissed out of hand. We also have Spock, who arranged for Kirk to escort the Chancellor in the first place, a decision that caused a great deal of anger for Kirk. But to Spock, this is a situation that will most logically lead to peace. The Klingons have damaged themselves, they need assistance from beyond, this is the perfect opportunity for peace. But what he doesn't understand is the human predisposition for fear of the unknown. Even when Valeris comes to him, she is obviously terrified, but Spock has something that she doesn't. Ordinarily, he would fall back on his logic, but this time, in addition to his logic, Spock's human side comes forward, and he relies on faith as well. faith in people caught up in this situation, and above all, faith in his friends. But once Kirk and Bones are taken into custody for the supposed murder of the Chancellor, Spock must find the real culprits before his friends are put to death or worse. This leads into one of the best whodunits that I have ever seen. The plot involving tracking down the conspirators constantly keeps you guessing, and the people who were really involved will likely surprise the hell out of you. The thing that makes this plot great is that this time we're dealing with an enemy from within. It's one thing to battle an outward threat, but when the villains are your comrades and your friends, it's a different story altogether. The ones who are really behind all this are the people you would never think to suspect, and that makes this one of the most successful mystery plots I have ever seen. As this is going on, Kirk and Bones are in a show trial. Their guilt has pretty much already been decided, this is just for the benefit of propaganda. And in this trial, something is used against Kirk. Not a forgery or something taken out of context. He really said it, and he really meant it.
I offer into the record this excerpt from the captain's personal log.
I've never trusted Klingons. And I never will. I've never been able to forgive them for the death of my boy. I've never trusted Klingons. And I never will. I've never been able to forgive them for the death of my boy.
Are those your words?
Those words were spoken by me.
Slowly but surely, Kirk is starting to realize that while he may not have wished Gorkon dead, his thoughts and feelings were more in line with the people who masterminded this than not. He too is guilty of prejudice, and this has come back to seal his fate. Kirk and Bones are thrown into a prison camp, and as they plan an escape, Kirk finally takes a step back and realizes what he's been doing this whole time.
Bones, are you afraid of the future?
I believe that was a general idea that I was trying to convey.
I don't mean this future.
What is this? Multiple choice?
Some people are afraid of what might happen. I was terrified. I was used to hating Klingons. It never even occurred to me to take Gorkon at his word.
Kirk has just summed up the virus of prejudice beautifully. When you are so dead set against another person, another race, another nation, another creed, that you stop thinking. The idea of peace didn't even enter Kirk's mind. This has gone far beyond legitimate suspicion and security. This has now become a part of who Kirk is. And it took the Chancellor being assassinated for him to learn where his prejudice has taken him and how far it's gone. After the prison rescue, he and Spock have an outstanding conversation about all this.
I couldn't get past the death of my son.
I was prejudiced by her accomplishments as a Vulcan.
Gorkon had to die before I understood how prejudiced I was.
In the end, it's revealed who the conspirators were. We have Chang, the Romulan ambassador, but also people from our side, Admiral Cartwright and Valeris herself. The thing is that these characters, for good or ill, didn't do what they did because they're bad people. They did it because they were afraid. And they weren't even afraid of an enemy or any specific plan or action that may be taken against them. They were simply afraid of change. All is eventually set right as the Enterprise saves the new Chancellor and the President as well, but the moral of the story is much farther reaching than just the Cold War in outer space. And this is where I think Gene had it wrong in his protests of this film. Humankind will evolve. We will become more morally intelligent, more tolerant of differences, and more enlightened. It's only a matter of time. But no matter what the future brings, there will always be prejudice. There will always be bigotry. It's just a part of human nature. We can't stop it, but we can reflect and be aware of it, if only to be more prepared for when it happens again. This film does have its lighthearted moments. There's a bit in here where they make fun of the subtitles, which is just inspired, and we get a Kirk versus Kirk fist fight, which the fans really loved, But at the core, this is a very serious reminder for future generations. Star Trek VI takes what at the time was a current event and sets it in the Star Trek universe, but at its core, it is a universal parable about the folly of prejudice. And like all of the great Star Trek stories, this is a film that will ultimately remain timeless. One of the best Star Trek films ever made.